Hello and welcome to today's Sports Psychology screencast. The focus is on attributions in sport. So, definition of term then, attributions basically refers to the reasons given for the causes of success and failure. Now, this happens, it's so commonplace in everyday life, not just sport, everyday life. People are successful, people fail, and they give reasons for the causes of that success and failure. A couple of examples, just so we can see this in action linked to sport. A sports team might have won, or they might attribute the reasons for them winning because they were the better team. Or they might lose, and they might attribute that failure to the fact that they're not very good. Now, that is what happens. You know, you win, you say because we're good at something. We lost because we're not very good at something. And the way that people attribute can have a huge impact on motivation. It can have an impact on confidence. It can have an impact on pride. It can have an impact on future expectations of success. And they're the key things, really, that we're looking at. So if you attribute effectively, it can have a positive effect on all of these things. If you attribute success or failure ineffectively, it can lead to these key, I suppose, psychological conditions being negative. So what we have to have a look at is how we can use an attribution model to help us classify and analyze attributions such as the two green quotations that you can see on the screen now. So, to do that, there was a theorist, a sports psychologist called Weiner, and he created a model of attribution. So when he researched all the reasons that people give for success and failure, he grouped them together into 4 types of attribution. Those 4 types of attribution were ability, effort, task difficulty, and luck. So they were the key types of attribution that he identified. An example of those could be linked to success or failure. I'll just give you a quick one onto here. We won because we were the better team, as we looked at before. You could then go to effort. We won because we tried hard. That's the kind of attribution someone would use if they were attributing their success to effort. Task difficulty. We lost because the team we played against are 2 leagues higher. That's an example of the task being too difficult. Therefore, that's why you lost. And then finally, luck. Okay, they had the referee on their side. We lost because they had the referee on their side. So you can see how these look. They are some examples of those types of attribution. Now, ultimately, Weiner created a model. To do this, he created 3 dimensions that would allow us to actually classify these types of attribution you can see in front of you. So to start with, the first dimension was known as the locus of causality. And this basically segregates or splits the attribution into either internal attributions, and they are things that come from within. So as you can see from here, ability is innate. It comes from within you. Effort comes from within you. You know, it's part of you. How hard you work is controlled by you. So that's your first bit. That comes from within, whereas the other part of the locus of causality is external. Okay, so these are reasons given for success and failure that are external and outside of the performer. So, for example, task difficulty. We lost because the team were 2 leagues high. That is outside. Okay, that is nothing to do with the individual performer. That's because the other team were too good. Luck, again, external. Outside. The reason comes from outside the performer. So in this case, luck. They had the referee on their side. So there's an example there of how that would be external. So our first dimension is the locus of causality. Now the second way Weiner wanted to categorize or classify these types of attribution was the second dimension. So he looked at the locus of stability. And this directly links into whether the attributions are stable, which means they can't change, or unstable, which means they can change. So if we have a look, and you follow my cursor across here, stable attributions are ability, because things like gross motor abilities such as speed and strength are relatively stable throughout your life, okay? You inherit them, and they don't change that much, okay? On top of that, task difficulty, a team that's 2 leagues above is always going to be 2 leagues above. If you're playing in a difficult competition or against a team that is a higher standard, that's not going to change. So that is considered stable. Whereas you go down to the, follow my cursor now, you've got unstable. Unstable are attributions or reasons that can change. Now, effort can change. Sometimes you work hard, other times you don't work hard, which makes it unstable. Luck, again, can change. One week you might have the referee on the opposition side, which means you lose, but another week that luck might change and the referee is on your side, which means it's unstable. So if you put that into a model, that is Weiner's attribution model. That's how it started. It's been used in education as for reasons why people give for their success and failure in exams. And it's also been used a lot in sport. So this was the initial model. That is the basic model of attribution. Now, this model was developed, okay? And it was developed to give a third dimension. And this dimension is known as the dimension of controllability. So controllability is the third dimension that you can't actually see on the attribution model. And the controllability dimension directly links to whether the attribution, the reason given for the cause of success or failure, is in the performer's control or not. Now, according to this model, there is only one controllable attribution. The only attribution you can control 100% of the time is effort, okay? So controllable attributions are effort only, okay? And then, you look at this, and some people think, well, what about ability? Well, ability, if you're looking at gross motor abilities, and those physical abilities, like how fast you are, will be dictated by the muscle fibers that you inherit. So they are considered uncontrollable, because if you look at this, uncontrollable here, any uncontrollable attributions are linked to things that you cannot control the luck. You cannot control the team that you're up against and how difficult that game is. And you can't control the gross motor abilities that you inherit, okay? Speed, strength to a certain extent, okay? So that's what we're looking at there. That's our first section. Now, what we're now at a position where this is the subject knowledge that you are required to know. So we have 3 dimensions: locus of causality, locus of stability, controllability dimension. And we have to be able to use this information in certain ways. So what I'm going to do is just show you very, very quickly an example here of an exam question. So in order to be successful in this exam question, I'm going to teach you how to double classify attributions. So if I said to you on here, we started off with our first thing where I put up 4 attributions. We put ability, effort, task difficulty, and luck. So as you can see in this question, the question's asking, use a practical example from sport to show an internal, stable attribution for failure. So internal, stable. That is a double classification. So what you have to be able to do is understand that when you look at this model, if you look down to here now, you can see that if you look across the locus of causality here, you've got internal here, okay? And you go down to here and you've got stable. Where stable meets internal, you've got ability. So ability is something that comes from within you, okay, and it can't change, or it can't change very much. So that is why it's considered internal and stable. So in terms of how you would respond to these type of things, what are we looking to do? So if we look back onto here, how do we double classify attributions? So let's have a look. As we looked, we've already kind of had a look at ability. So we know that ability then, if we're going to double classify the type of attribution that is ability, it will be internal and stable. So if we go down now and have a look at effort, as we can see down here, effort comes under here, so it comes under the internal and then unstable. So that means that it comes from within us, but we can change it. Then we go down to task difficulty. So that is something that's external. The reason for successful failure will be outside of us, but it does not change, so it's stable. So we've got that in there. Finally, we go down to luck, which is something that is considered external and unstable. So that puts us into a position where we are now able to use the subject knowledge from Weiner's attribution model to be able to double classify our attribution types, which are ability, effort, task difficulty, and luck. And then we can go back up to this exam question here, where it's asking us to say, okay, so what we've got now is this situation whereby it's saying use a practical example from sport, show an internal, stable attribution for failure. So what we've got to do here is this. We're looking for certain things in the exam question. Now, it says a practical example from sport, okay? So what that means is we've got to use a quotation, like down here, but we've got to directly link it to sport. We've got to make sure it matches the internal stable attribution from the grid, and then we've got to make sure it's got the nuance of giving the application to failure. So what I would do here, I've got to be specific because it says from sport. So I would need to say, I'm going to start off by saying, I'm going to show I understand that internal stable attribution is ability. And then I'm going to say, we lost, because it's failure, the football game, example from sport, because we're not very good. And the not very good bit is showing the ability aspect of the attribution for failure. So if you look at that, that will be how we would double classify, the questions double classified in this case, and then we have had to put that into an example from sport using a quotation that applies that key thing linked to ability. So you can see how that would work. That's an example of that as we go through. So if we have a look at where we're at the moment, then we've looked at how we use Weiner's attribution model to classify reasons for success and failure. So that's where we're at the moment. So in terms of where we're going to be moving to be able to develop our understanding of attributions, we then have to have a look at this idea that the way and the reasons that we give for the causes of success and failure, the way that we do that, whichever attributions we use on this model, will directly link to certain psychological conditions coming to the fore. So what we have to be able to do now then is say, if we use some of these attributions, they can lead to the following psychological conditions. They can lead to mastery orientation, they can lead to something called learned helplessness, or they could lead to something called self-serving bias. Now, once we have an understanding of what these are, which we'll look at on the next slide, this will then allow us to analyze the impact of these attributions. So if we attribute effectively, it will allow us to experience something called mastery orientation. And if we have mastery orientation, this will then have a positive effect on our motivation, confidence, pride, and future expectations of success. So what we have is this idea that we'll be able to move through three processes. At the moment, we are here. We're now going to have a look at what these conditions are, and then we're going to look at how these attributions link to these conditions, and then finally how these will impact confidence, motivation, future expectations of success, and pride. So let's have a quick look then, very quickly. So let's have a look at these different attributions. They can lead to certain psychological conditions. Mastery orientation then refers to somebody, a psychological condition where you are motivated to be an expert, you are competitive, you are desperate to get better in whatever you do. And this is a real positive psychological condition. Now, a negative way that attributions can form psychological conditions is linked to something called learned helplessness. Now, learned helplessness refers to this idea, these individuals who have the psychological mindset where they believe failure is inevitable. It's always going to happen. Okay, so failure is inevitable. The final psychological condition that can be linked directly to different types of attributions is self-serving bias. Now, self-serving bias refers to a biased attribution for failure that's usually done to protect confidence or self-esteem. And you see this all the time with managers in Premier League football, and you see them, or whatever football, and they come on the screen. If they lost, it's always because of the referee. The referee is an external, unstable attribution. Therefore, it protects confidence and self-esteem. So if I said to you on here, once we have these psychological conditions linked to certain attribution types, we can then talk about, analyze how it will impact motivation, confidence, and all the things I've got down here. So that's our next step, really. That's where we're looking to move on to. In the lesson, we will have a look specifically at how specific attribution types will lead to specific psychological conditions, as we've looked at here, and then we'll have a look at analyzing how they will impact positively or negatively motivation, confidence, pride, and future expectations of success.